My name is Fair Gentry, and I was 32 the day I drove 6 hours through thick Louisiana heat just to find out my family had replaced me. Not metaphorically, literally. I stood on the pristine lawn of a Shreveport country club at exactly 4 in the afternoon. That was the precise time my mother instructed me to arrive for the highly anticipated Gentry family reunion photo. My heels dug into the soft grass as I walked toward the gazebo, but the professional photographer was already folding his silver light reflectors and snapping the latches on his padded equipment cases. I spotted my mother, Patricia, standing near a row of boxwood hedges. She held a crystal champagne flute and wore a look of mild irritation. She did not flinch when she saw me approaching. "You are late," she said, smoothing the lapel of her blazer. "We already took the picture." "There was not enough room in the frame for your outfit anyway." I did not look at my watch. I knew what time it was. I looked past her shoulder toward the gazebo. Standing next to my father, Vernon, and my younger sister, Kendall, was Harper. Harper was a local real estate notary and Kendall's shadow since middle school. Today, she was standing exactly where the eldest daughter should stand. Worse, she was wearing a custom navy silk dress. It was the exact matching outfit my mother claimed was sold out when I asked for the dress code 3 weeks prior. They were laughing. The photographer raised his camera for one last candid shot, and they all smiled, like my absence made the picture perfect. I did not cry. I did not demand an explanation. I pulled my phone from my purse, took a clear photograph of their performance, and sent it to one specific person. 48 hours later, my mother would call my phone 67 times in a row, begging for a favor she did not deserve. But we will get to that. First, you need to understand the kind of people who hire a stand-in for their own blood. Welcome back to QT Told Stories, where we dismantle toxic families with cold facts and quiet justice. Hit that subscribe button and drop your age and location in the comments. I love seeing who is listening. I live in New Orleans, where I work as a senior commercial underwriter and a certified public accountant. My job revolves around assessing risk, reading the fine print, and uncovering the lies people bury in their financial disclosures. It is an exacting profession. You have to look at a towering structure and locate the hidden fractures. Growing up with Patricia and Vernon Gentry taught me how to spot a bad investment early on. My parents valued appearances over authenticity every single time. Kendall learned how to play their game early, wrapping herself in their approval. I chose to step away and build my own life, dollar by dollar, in a city 6 hours south. I thought driving up for a simple photo meant we were finding common ground. I had no idea I was walking into a calculated trap. I stood on the manicured grass and let the sweltering heat of the Louisiana afternoon press against my shoulders. The visual sting of exclusion does not arrive like a loud crash. It creeps in quietly through the small details you are not supposed to notice. My eyes locked onto Harper. She was standing exactly where the eldest daughter belonged, laughing at a joke my father just told. But the true insult was the fabric draping across her shoulders. Harper was wearing a tailored navy silk wrap dress. 3 weeks ago, when my mother sent the calendar invite for this reunion, I asked her what the color palette would be. Patricia told me she had ordered matching navy silk dresses from a boutique in Baton Rouge, but she claimed my size was already sold out. She suggested I wear whatever I had in my closet, something plain that would not draw focus. Yet there was Harper, a woman who did not share my blood, wearing the precise garment my mother said was unavailable. The fabric caught the late afternoon sun, shimmering with a polished, expensive sheen. I did not turn around and walk back to my car. That is what a wounded daughter would do. Instead, I walked directly toward the gazebo. My heels clicked against the stone pathway, cutting through the ambient noise of clinking glasses and polite chatter. As I approached, the group turned. My father offered a tight, uncomfortable smile and took a step back, letting my mother handle the interference. Kendall did not even look at me. She was too busy whispering something to Harper. I stopped a few feet away from my mother. Patricia let out a long, exaggerated sigh. She held her champagne flute with 2 fingers, a gesture designed to look elegant, but which only signaled her impatience. I asked her why Harper was wearing the dress I was told did not exist. Patricia waved her free hand in the air as if brushing away a bothersome insect. She said Harper just stepped in for a quick lighting test because I could not bother to arrive on time. It was a lazy lie. The photographer was already packing his lenses into hard-shell travel cases. The session was over. Then Harper shifted her weight, bringing her arm up to adjust her hair. The movement exposed the cuff of her navy sleeve. Stitched into the silk in delicate silver thread were two letters, an F and a G. I stared at the monogram. Fair Gentry. Not Harper. My initials. The breath caught in my throat not from sadness, but from a sudden, sharp clarity. I looked from the silver thread directly into my mother's eyes. I asked her why the best friend was wearing a dress tailored to my measurements and embroidered with my initials. Patricia tightened her grip on her glass. Her jaw locked into a familiar, rigid line. She leaned forward and lowered her voice to a harsh whisper. She told me to stop being dramatic. She said I was ruining a beautiful afternoon by picking fights over a piece of clothing. She claimed the boutique made a mistake with the embroidery, and Harper was just doing them a favor by wearing it so the photos would look uniform. Stop being dramatic. It is the ultimate weapon of a cornered liar. Growing up, that phrase was the firewall my mother built around her behavior. If you noticed the slight, you were dramatic. If you pointed out the unfairness, you were unstable. For years, that word worked on me. It made me question my own perception. It made me shrink. But I was no longer a child seeking validation. I was a commercial underwriter. I spent 50 hours a week pulling apart corporate financial statements, looking for the exact moment a narrative stopped matching the math. My underwriter instincts activated, pushing the wounded daughter aside and bringing the lead auditor to the forefront. I stopped looking at my mother. I took a physical step back and began to scan the environment. I analyzed the perimeter, not as a family gathering, but as a scene requiring a risk assessment. The first discrepancy was the equipment. The photographer was not a local portrait studio hire. His hard cases bore the logo of a high-end commercial marketing agency based in Dallas. You do not hire a commercial agency for a backyard family reunion. The second discrepancy was the catering. A long table sat under a white canopy near the country club entrance. Waiters in crisp white shirts and black ties carried silver trays of hors d'oeuvres. But they were not serving extended family members. I looked at the crowd mingling on the patio. There were no cousins. There were no aunts or uncles. The guests were men and women in tailored business suits. They wore leather dress shoes and carried sleek leather portfolios. A few of them had subtle lapel pins denoting local Shreveport investment groups. They stood in small circles, speaking in hushed professional tones. The atmosphere was stiff, calculated, and geared entirely toward networking. This was not a family reunion. This was a corporate launch event. I turned my attention back to the gazebo. The photographer finished packing and walked away. My father patted Harper on the shoulder and headed toward the bar. That left Kendall and Harper standing together. A man in a sharp gray suit approached them. He held a glossy brochure in one hand and a cocktail in the other. He smiled broadly and extended his hand to Kendall. Kendall shook it with practiced enthusiasm. Then the man turned his attention to Harper. This is the moment the ground beneath me shifted. I stood near the boxwood hedge, perfectly still, blending into the shadows of the late afternoon, and I watched. Harper did not greet the man the way Harper normally greeted people. The Harper I knew was loud, overly animated, and prone to wide, toothy smiles and frantic hand gestures. But the woman standing in the navy silk dress with my initials on her wrist did not do any of those things. When the man in the gray suit spoke to her, Harper tilted her head slightly to the left. She offered a small, reserved smile. She clasped her hands together in front of her waist, fingers resting delicately over her knuckles. When she laughed at whatever the man said, the sound was quiet, measured, and controlled. It was a polite, professional chuckle that barely parted her lips. My breath slowed down. I recognized that posture. I recognized that tilt of the head. I recognized that exact, calculated laugh. It was my posture. It was my laugh. I use that exact body language when I sit across from loan officers in New Orleans. I use that specific stance when I am listening to a client explain a financial shortfall. It is a carefully constructed professional persona designed to project competence, calm, and authority. It took me years to refine it. Harper was not just standing in my spot for a photograph. She was not just wearing a dress with my initials because of a boutique error. She was mirroring my physical behavior. She had studied my mannerisms. My mother and sister had not hired a stand-in to fill a gap in a family portrait. They had coached an imposter. Let me explain how an underwriter thinks. When we look at a discrepancy, we do not ask how it makes us feel. We ask what risk it presents. A dress with the wrong initials is a mistake. A dress with the wrong initials worn by a woman mimicking your professional posture in front of regional investors is a coordinated fraud. I knew Harper's actual background. She was a notary public who worked out of a strip mall real estate office on the edge of town. She spent her weekends posting blurry photos of cheap cocktails and complaining about her rent. She did not know the first thing about commercial compliance interest rate swaps or corporate liability. Yet here she was, standing on a manicured lawn, projecting the quiet confidence of a woman who managed corporate risk every day. The effort it must have taken to train her turned my stomach. My mother must have sat Harper down and dissected my personality. Patricia must have explained how I hold my hands, how I respond to small talk, how I project authority without raising my voice. They had studied me like a blueprint. They extracted the parts of me that held value, the parts that signaled financial stability and professional success, and they pasted those parts onto a woman who would never talk back to them. Harper was the daughter Patricia always wanted, a girl who looked successful on paper but remained entirely under Patricia's control. The man in the gray suit nodded at something Harper said. He looked impressed. He raised his glass to her in a small toast. Harper maintained the reserved smile, her silver monogram catching the light as she lifted her own glass. She was executing the performance flawlessly. They were building a narrative, and they needed a compliant, controllable version of me to sell it to the men in the sharp suits. Harper was playing the role of fair gentry, and she was playing it for an audience that held checkbooks and investment portfolios. I did not confront them. I did not raise my voice or throw my purse or demand that Harper take off the dress. I stood in the heavy Louisiana heat and let the cold reality wash over me. The family I drove 6 hours to see did not just want to exclude me. They wanted to consume my identity and wear it like a costume. I realized in that exact second that this was not a dispute over a family photo. This was a theft. I was watching someone steal the professional armor I had spent a decade forging. I did not need to cry. I needed to audit the entire event. I needed to know exactly what they were selling, and more importantly, I needed to know what it was going to cost me. I adjusted my grip on my purse, smoothed the fabric of my own plain skirt, and walked quietly toward the patio. I needed to get close enough to hear every single word the imposter was saying. I moved away from the open lawn and positioned myself behind a tall row of manicured boxwood hedges bordering the flagstone patio. The thick Louisiana heat remained oppressive, pressing against the back of my neck and soaking into the fabric of my skirt. But the air inside my lungs felt suddenly frigid. I was experiencing a very specific kind of psychological terror. It is the creeping, suffocating realization that you are being systematically erased while you are still standing on the property. I did not storm onto the patio. I did not demand the attention of the crowd. I stayed hidden in the deep green shadows of the dense foliage. Through the narrow gaps in the leaves, I secured a clear line of sight to the cocktail reception. Waiters circulated through the crowd, holding silver trays piled high with crab cakes and endive spears. A string quartet played a low, rhythmic jazz standard in the corner, providing a sophisticated soundtrack to the theft occurring in plain sight. The guests were men in tailored summer suits and women in conservative business attire. They held their drinks close to their chests and formed tight, exclusive circles of influence. I recognized the distinct predatory hum of high-level corporate networking. My sister Kendall moved through the crowd with practiced, seamless ease. She wore a bright ivory sheath dress playing the role of the vibrant, visionary founder. Harper walked exactly half a step behind her. She was draped in my monogrammed navy silk, playing the role of the quiet, serious partner. They were targeting a cluster of older men standing near the outdoor bar. These men wore the relaxed, entitled posture of individuals who controlled significant capital. I recognized one of them from the covers of local financial journals. He was a prominent commercial developer in Shreveport, known for funding large suburban projects. I held my breath, ignoring the rough branches scratching my forearms, and leaned closer to the hedge. The ambient noise of the party dipped just enough for me to hear Kendall speak. "Gentleman," Kendall said. Her voice dripped with an exaggerated Southern charm she only utilized when asking for money. "I want to introduce you to the backbone of our entire operation." Kendall placed a steady hand on Harper's shoulder and pulled her forward into the center of the circle. "This is my sister, Fair. She handles all our underwriting and corporate compliance." Hearing my own name spoken aloud and attached to another human being sent a cold electric shock down my spine. The men smiled, shifting their weight, and offered their hands in greeting. Harper stepped forward and shook them one by one. She used a firm, brief, authoritative grip. It was my grip. It is a specific handshake I perfected during my first year at a cutthroat accounting firm to ensure older male partners took my financial projections seriously. Harper executed the gesture flawlessly. "It is a pleasure to meet you," Harper said. She lowered her voice an entire octave to match my natural measured cadence. I prefer to stay behind the spreadsheets and let Kendall handle the spotlight, but this project is too important to miss. The developer chuckled, swirling the ice in his bourbon glass. "We always appreciate the numbers, people," he said. "A good CPA is worth her weight in gold in this market." "How did you get your start, Fair?" I gripped the rough branches of the boxwood hedge. The bark dug deep into my palms, grounding me in reality. I waited for Harper to stumble. I waited for her to offer a vague deflection or a charming giggle. She did not deflect. She smiled that small, reserved smile and looked the developer right in the eye, fully prepared to steal my history. "I learned the value of a clean ledger the hard way," Harper said. "I paid my way through college by working night shifts at a boutique accounting firm in New Orleans. I would clock in at 11, reconcile accounts until 3 in the morning, and drink terrible break room coffee just to keep my eyes open. I studied for my licensing exams on the roof of the building while watching the sun come up over the Mississippi River. It taught me that there are no shortcuts in finance. You either put in the hours or the structure collapses." My stomach turned over. I felt a wave of profound, visceral disgust. That was not a generalized anecdote designed to sound good at a party. That was my exact memory. I was the one who drank bitter burnt coffee from a styrofoam cup at 3 in the morning. I was the one who traced numbers on balance sheets until my vision blurred. I was the one who sat on the gritty tar roof of a downtown high-rise, shivering in the damp dawn air, with a taxation textbook resting in my lap. Those were the grueling, lonely hours I spent building a career out of nothing. Harper had never worked a night shift in her life. Harper spent her 20s bouncing between part-time receptionist jobs and letting her parents cover her rent. Yet here she was, wearing my monogram, using my voice, and wearing my hard-earned struggles like a borrowed piece of jewelry. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Harper could not have known those specific details on her own. I rarely spoke about my early career struggles, and I certainly never shared them with Kendall's social circle. There was only one person I ever told about the sunrise over the Mississippi River. My mother, Patricia. Patricia had taken the most vulnerable, painful chapters of my life and packaged them into a corporate script. She handed my history to Harper because she needed a compelling backstory for her fake executive. Patricia created a mirror daughter. She engineered a version of me who possessed all my professional credibility, but lacked my stubborn independence. She wanted the CPA, the underwriter, the self-made woman. She just did not want me. The investors nodded with genuine respect. They loved the story. They saw a disciplined, hungry professional who understood the value of hard work. They were buying the illusion wholesale. The developer raised his glass. "Welfare," he said. "That kind of grit is exactly what we look for in our development partners. Your sister is lucky to have you verifying the capital." I needed to document everything. My brain shifted out of the emotional shock and fully into the clinical detachment of a fraud investigator. I shifted my weight, preparing to pull my phone from my pocket to record the rest of the conversation. As I moved, my elbow brushed against a tall, wrought iron cocktail table stationed near the edge of the patio. The table wobbled slightly on the uneven flagstone. I reached out to steady it and noticed a neat, symmetrical stack of printed materials resting on the glass top. They were marketing packets. The paper was heavy, expensive cardstock with a smooth, matte finish. I picked one up, testing the weight of it in my hands. The cover featured a gold foil logo shaped like a classic Southern estate with towering columns. Below the logo, printed in bold, elegant typography, were the words "Gentry and Daughters, Heritage Estates." My pulse synchronized with the low, thumping bass of the jazz music. I did not need to ask what this company was. The name alone broadcasted the ambition. Kendall and Patricia were launching a luxury real estate development firm. This was a capital-intensive industry. It required immense upfront funding, pristine credit, and rigorous financial backing. Neither Kendall nor Patricia possessed those qualifications. Kendall had a history of maxed-out retail credit cards and failed boutique ventures. Patricia had the social connections, but zero financial liquidity. They could never secure commercial funding on their own merits. They needed a golden ticket. I opened the heavy cover of the brochure. The pages inside were filled with architectural renderings of high-end subdivisions, manicured golf courses, and flowery language about legacy and trust. I flipped past the mission statement and the projected construction timelines. I turned to the back section, seeking the structural foundation of their lie. The page was titled, "Our Executive Team." There were 3 profiles listed on the page, separated by clean, minimalist lines. The first profile belonged to Patricia Gentry, Chief Executive Officer. Her photo showed her smiling warmly, projecting maternal reliability and old money grace. The second profile belonged to Kendall Gentry, Director of Acquisitions. She looked vibrant, ambitious, and ready to close deals. I slid my finger down the heavy paper to the third profile. My chest tightened until it was difficult to draw breath. The printed title read, Lead Financial Officer. Directly underneath the title, printed in the same crisp, undeniable font, was my name, Fair Gentry, Certified Public Accountant. The text detailed my 10 years of experience in commercial underwriting. It listed my state licensing credentials, my degree, and my track record of managing risk for high-yield investments. Every professional milestone I ever achieved was printed on that page to validate their fraudulent company. But the name and the credentials were not the worst part. Next to the biography was a professional headshot. The woman in the photograph had her hair pulled back into a sleek, sensible style. She wore a tailored navy blazer and a subtle silver necklace. She looked directly into the camera with a reserved, authoritative smile. It was not a picture of me. The face staring back at me from a document claiming my name, my license, and my entire professional history was Harper. I folded the heavy cardstock of the brochure precisely in half. I did not crush the paper. I did not tear the photograph of the imposter into pieces. I slid the document into the inner zipper compartment of my leather purse, treating it like a piece of forensic evidence. In the realm of commercial finance, a printed prospectus is not a mere marketing tool. It is a legally binding declaration of corporate structure. When you print a name alongside a certified public accountant designation on an investment document, you are signaling to state and federal regulatory boards that the licensed individual bears fiduciary responsibility for the company ledger. My mother and sister had not just stolen my face for a vanity project. They had tethered my professional license to a high-risk real estate venture without my consent. The gravity of the situation required a clinical mind. In my line of work, we classify deception into distinct categories. There is opportunistic theft, which is sloppy and impulsive. Then there is systemic fabrication. Systemic fabrication requires planning, capital, and accomplices. My family was operating at the latter level. They understood that securing millions of dollars in suburban development funds required a pristine financial anchor. Real estate is a volatile sector. Lenders demand a guarantor with spotless credit, a verifiable income history, and the professional credentials to navigate complex tax liabilities. Kendall possessed none of those attributes. Patricia possessed none of those attributes either. I was the only asset they had. By pasting Harper's face next to my credentials, they engineered a phantom executive who could sign away my future while remaining entirely under their thumb. I turned my gaze back through the gaps in the boxwood hedge. The jazz quartet shifted to a faster tempo, but the rhythm of the party remained steady. Kendall and Harper had moved away from the local developer. They were now circling a new target near the center of the flagstone patio. The man they were speaking to was tall, wearing a crisp charcoal suit and a distinctive silver tie pin shaped like a pelican. I recognized that pin. I recognized the man. His name was Bradley Thorne. He was a senior regional lending officer for Pelican State Bank. Pelican State Bank was not a small community credit union. They were a heavyweight commercial lender operating across the Gulf South. They handled 8-figure construction loans and required rigorous due diligence before releasing a single cent of capital. I knew this because my firm audited their commercial portfolio 3 years ago. Bradley was known in the industry as a meticulous underwriter. He did not hand out development cash based on charming smiles or Southern hospitality. He required hard data, verified tax returns, and face-to-face interrogations with the primary financial guarantors. Seeing him holding a cocktail and laughing with Kendall sent a cold spike of adrenaline through my veins. I needed to hear their exchange. I stepped backward, keeping my heels quiet on the grass, and navigated around the edge of the thick hedge. A large stone pillar supporting the patio awning provided a natural blind spot. I positioned myself behind the cold masonry, mere feet from where the trio stood. The scent of expensive cologne and roasted pecans drifted through the humid air. I held my breath and tuned out the background chatter, isolating the sound of their voices. Bradley was holding a sleek digital tablet, gesturing to a colorful rendering of a subdivision. The initial grading phase looks solid, Bradley said, tapping the screen with his index finger. But as we discussed, the infrastructure costs for the water and sewer lines are front-loaded. The committee was initially hesitant about releasing that much uncollateralized capital for Phase 1. Kendall nodded, her expression serious and practiced. We understand the risk, Bradley, but that is exactly why we structured the executive team the way we did. We wanted to ensure the bank felt secure about the financial oversight. Bradley shifted his attention directly to Harper. He offered a warm, professional smile. "And you certainly delivered on that front," he said. "I have to admit, Fair, your cash flow projections were some of the most conservative and bulletproof models I have seen this quarter. You clearly know how to stress test a real estate portfolio against market downturns." Harper let out that quiet, measured laugh she had stolen from me. "I appreciate the compliment," Bradley Harper said, utilizing my exact cadence. "When you have spent a decade auditing failed ventures, you learn to build a bunker before you build a house. We want Pelican State Bank to know their capital is protected." Bradley took a sip of his drink and nodded in agreement, while the underwriting team was thoroughly impressed. "I am so glad we got that Zoom verification sorted out last week, Fair. I know it is a tedious requirement, but federal regulations dictate we record a video confirmation of identity for the primary guarantor on any commercial loan exceeding $1 million. The committee reviewed the footage, loved your projections, and gave us the green light to proceed to closing." The world around me went dead silent. The jazz music, the clinking glasses, the low hum of conversation, all vanished, replaced by the rushing sound of blood in my ears. A Zoom verification, a federally recorded banking call. The implications of those words detonated in my mind with terrifying precision. Harper had not just worn my clothes for a local magazine spread. She had not just handed out business cards at a cocktail party. Commercial banks are bound by strict know your customer laws. Before dispersing seven-figure loans, they are legally required to verify the identity of the person guaranteeing the debt. Because I lived in New Orleans and the business was based in Shreveport, the bank allowed a digital verification. My mother and sister had set up a formal video conference with a senior lending officer. They sat Harper in front of a webcam, dressed her in my professional attire, and had her answer complex financial questions using scripts they likely forced her to memorize. Harper had stared into a camera, stated my full legal name, and verbally confirmed that she was pledging my personal assets to guarantee their corporate debt. This was not a localized deception. This was federal wire fraud. This was institutional identity theft executed on a recorded, government-regulated platform. They had secured a multi-million-dollar illusion, and they used my clean financial history as the collateral. If Gentry and Daughters Heritage Estates defaulted on the development loan, the bank would not seize Kendall's non-existent savings. They would not seize Patricia's leased vehicles. They would come straight for my bank accounts, my property, and my certified public accountant license. I stood behind the stone pillar gripping the edge of the masonry until my knuckles turned white. The sheer audacity of the scheme was staggering. But a critical logical discrepancy pierced through my racing thoughts, pulling me out of the shock. A bank like Pelican State Bank does not approve a seven-figure loan based on a Zoom call alone. They run rigorous credit checks. They pull deep background reports from all three major bureaus. Every single time a financial institution pulls a hard inquiry on my Social Security number, my strict credit monitoring software sends an instant alert to my phone and my personal email. I had not received a single alert, not one text message, not one email notification. A loan of this magnitude would have triggered a cascade of security warnings. The only way those alerts could be bypassed or silenced was if someone with legacy access to my primary financial routing had intentionally diverted them. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone, no longer caring about the party happening just feet away. I needed to open my banking application. I needed to see exactly who was standing guard at the gates of my digital life, intercepting the warnings that should have saved me. I stepped away from the cold stone pillar and turned my back on the flagstone patio. The upbeat rhythm of the jazz quartet faded into a muffled hum as I walked through the heavy glass double doors into the main building of the country club. The central air conditioning hit my skin a stark and sudden contrast to the stifling Louisiana humidity I had endured on the lawn. I bypassed the crowded main dining room, navigating a long carpeted hallway until I found the women's restroom. I pushed the thick oak door open, stepped inside, and locked the deadbolt behind me. The restroom offered a sanctuary of sterile marble, polished brass fixtures, and absolute quiet. The glaring fluorescent lighting overhead removed all the soft golden illusions of the party outside, replacing them with sharp, undeniable clarity. This environment suited my current state of mind. I walked over to the porcelain sink and turned the brass handle. I held my wrists under the freezing stream of tap water, using the physical sensation to slow my racing pulse. I looked up and met my own gaze in the wide mirror. I did not look like a woman whose identity had just been compromised. My expression remained neutral and composed. I looked exactly like a senior commercial underwriter preparing to dismantle a corrupt enterprise. I turned off the faucet, dried my hands methodically with a thick paper towel, and pulled my smartphone from my leather purse. I needed verifiable public records. In the state of Louisiana, corporate entities cannot hide their basic structural anatomy from the public eye. I opened my mobile browser and navigated directly to the Secretary of State business portal. This database serves as the bedrock of corporate accountability. It is the same digital tool lenders, lawyers, and forensic accountants use to pull the curtain back on limited liability companies and expose their true operators. The screen loaded with the familiar state seal. I tapped the search bar, typed the exact name I had seen on the glossy brochure, Gentry and Daughters, Heritage Estates, and pressed enter. The loading icon spun for 3 agonizing seconds before the system populated a comprehensive digital dossier. The company was registered as a domestic limited liability company in Caddo Parish. I checked the initial filing date. It was recorded exactly 6 months ago. My mother had been constructing this elaborate trap for half a year, laying the administrative groundwork while I sat in New Orleans entirely unaware of the target on my back. I scrolled down the page to the official officer registry. Patricia Gentry was listed as the managing member. Kendall Gentry was listed as a secondary member. Sitting directly below their names, permanently recorded in the state archives, was my own, Fair Gentry, Chief Financial Officer. Being listed as a corporate officer without consent was dangerous, but it was not the weapon itself. The true danger lay in the financial encumbrances attached to that title. I navigated away from the basic registry tab and entered the Uniform Commercial Code portal. For those unfamiliar with commercial lending, UCC filings are public declarations utilized by creditors to protect their investments. When a bank lends a significant amount of capital to a business, they file a UCC lien to publicly claim the borrower's assets as collateral. If a loan truly existed, the formal lien would be recorded in this specific database. I typed the LLC name into the debtor search field and initiated the query. The system generated a single glaring hit. The secured party on the filing was listed as Pelican State Bank. The formal filing date was recorded precisely 8 days ago. My breath caught in my chest. I tapped the blue hyperlink to open the digitized legal document. A multi-page PDF loaded on my screen, displaying the standard rigid grid of a UCC financing statement. I bypassed the boilerplate legal jargon and zoomed in on the collateral section to read the specific terms of the agreement. The document outlined a commercial real estate development loan. The approved principal amount was $1.5 million. The listed collateral included all current and future business assets, heavy equipment, and accounts receivable. But any underwriter knows that a brand new real estate venture possesses no actual liquid assets. The bank would never release $1.5 million based on architectural renderings alone. They required a personal safety net to mitigate their risk. I scrolled further down to the guarantor addendum. There it was, etched in digital ink. My full legal name. My permanent home address in New Orleans. My specific certified public accountant license number. They had pledged my personal solvency to underwrite their corporate gamble. If the Shreveport development failed, the bank held the legal right to liquidate my personal savings, garnish my future corporate wages, and petition to strip my professional license to recoup their losses. Patricia and Kendall had effectively handed a commercial lender the keys to my entire financial existence. I stared at the harsh, black text on the glowing screen. The sheer scale of the fraud was breathtaking. But as the initial wave of shock subsided, a glaring logical inconsistency pierced through my analytical mind, bringing my thoughts to a sudden halt. A commercial loan of $1.5 million does not materialize in a vacuum. Before Bradley Thorne and the Pelican State Bank Loan Committee authorized a single dollar, they would have executed a rigorous deep dive into my financial history. They would have initiated hard credit inquiries across Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion to verify my creditworthiness. I manage risk for a living. Because I understand how easily financial ruin can occur, I maintain an uncompromising credit monitoring infrastructure. My personal accounts are locked down with strict security protocols. Anytime a financial institution initiates a hard pull on my Social Security number, my software sends an immediate push notification to my phone and an urgent alert to my primary email inbox. It is an automated fail-safe system designed to catch identity theft in the exact moment the perpetrator attempts to open a line of credit. Yet for the past 6 months while my mother established the LLC, and for the past 8 days while the bank finalized the lien, my phone had remained perfectly silent. I had not received a single security text message. I had not received a single email warning me of unauthorized credit checks. The Pelican State Bank underwriting department had torn through my credit files, and my alarms had never sounded. You cannot bribe an automated security algorithm. The system had not failed. It had been intentionally tampered with. The only way to silence those critical alerts was from the inside. Someone had to possess the master login credentials to my financial hub, bypass the dual-factor authentication, and manually alter the notification pathways to keep me in the dark. I minimized the web browser and opened my secure banking application. The facial recognition scanner verified my identity and granted me access to the main dashboard. My checking and savings balances looked entirely normal. No funds had been drained. That aligned with their strategy. They did not want to steal my current cash reserves. They wanted to steal my borrowing power and my pristine reputation. I navigated away from the account balances and opened the Deep Security Settings menu located in the application preferences. I tapped on the Notification Routing tab. The screen displayed a vertical list of toggle switches for text alerts, push notifications, and email warnings. Every single toggle corresponding to hard credit inquiries, new loan originations, and large transaction warnings had been manually switched to the off position. I had not touched those specific settings in over 3 years. I scrolled further down the page to the account contact information section. This is the central nervous system of the banking profile, dictating exactly where the bank sends critical security correspondence. My primary email address was still listed in the top field, but right below it, nestled in a hidden field designated for emergency secondary routing, was a second email address. It was an address I had never seen before. It was an address engineered specifically to intercept all security alerts, password reset requests, and credit inquiries before they ever reached my phone. I stared at the secondary email, analyzing the characters on the screen. It was not a random string of numbers and letters. It was a highly specific combination of familiar initials followed by a birth year. A cold, heavy realization settled deep in my chest, replacing the sterile air of the bathroom with a profound sense of betrayal. I knew exactly who created that email, and I knew exactly who held the master keys to my digital life. I stared at the secondary email address glowing on the high-resolution screen of my phone. The sequence of letters and numbers was not a sophisticated cryptographic hash. It was a lazy, arrogant combination of familiar data points. VG1962 at a generic encrypted mail server. Vernon Gentry, born in 1962. The sterile white light of the country club restroom seemed to dim, pulling the air out of my lungs and replacing it with a freezing, suffocating vacuum. In the architecture of family dysfunction, there is usually a designated villain and a designated bystander. For my entire life, I believed my mother played the role of the aggressor, while my father occupied the role of the quiet, suffering captive. Vernon was the man who retreated to the garage when Patricia started shouting. He was the man who offered sympathetic, tight-lipped smiles across the dinner table when Kendall received a brand new car and I received a lecture on financial responsibility. I always categorized my father as a passive survivor of the Gentry household, assuming we shared a silent, unspoken solidarity. That illusion fractured and dissolved into dust as I looked at his initials embedded in my security routing. A passive man does not construct a secondary digital intercept protocol. A bystander does not bypass dual-factor authentication to blindfold his own daughter. My father was not a captive in this criminal enterprise. He was the inside man. To understand how Vernon gained the master keys to my financial existence, you have to rewind 14 years. I was 18 years old, preparing to pack my modest belongings into a used sedan and drive south to New Orleans for my freshman year of college. I needed to open a student checking account to manage my scholarship funds and the meager wages I planned to earn waiting tables. Because I lacked a significant credit history, the local Shreveport Credit Union required a parental cosigner. I remember sitting in the small, glass-walled office of the branch manager. The air smelled like stale coffee and lemon polish. Vernon sat in the chair next to me, holding a heavy brass pen. He signed his name on the guarantor line, patted my shoulder, and told me he wanted to ensure I had a safety net. He said he was proud of my independence and wanted to help me build a strong foundation. For over a decade, I carried that memory as a rare, cherished piece of evidence that my father genuinely cared for me. It was my psychological anchor. But the rigid laws of commercial banking do not care about sentimental memories. Under federal banking regulations, a cosigner on a primary account retains persistent administrative privileges unless the primary account holder submits a formal, notarized request to sever the connection. I never filed that request. I kept the same primary checking account through college, into my early career, and throughout my ascent to a senior underwriting position. That origin point became the central hub for my payroll deposits, my savings transfers, and my overarching credit profile. And for 14 years, Vernon maintained legacy access to the digital dashboard governing my life. I leaned against the cool porcelain sink and mapped out the exact sequence of his betrayal. Patricia and Kendall possessed the ambition to build a luxury real estate firm, but they lacked the technical capability to execute the identity theft. They needed my Social Security number, but a 9-digit code is useless without supporting documentation. Commercial lenders demand comprehensive proof of income. They require 3 years of federal tax returns, corporate W-2 forms, and verified asset statements. Harper could not access those documents. Patricia did not know how to navigate a secure portal. Vernon was the only individual with the administrative clearance to download my entire fiscal history. He logged into my account from his desktop computer. He generated the necessary PDF statements. He handed my verified tax documents to my mother so she could package the fraudulent loan application. And when the lender initiated the credit inquiries, Vernon was the one who logged into my security settings, toggled the warning systems off, and routed the alerts to his ghost email address to ensure I never saw the threat coming. The betrayal was breathtaking in its precision. He did not act out of a sudden emotional impulse. He executed a methodical, calculated data breach. He sold my future to fund his wife's vanity project, all while maintaining the facade of the helpless, well-meaning father. In commercial risk management, the most dangerous threats do not arrive wearing a mask and holding a weapon. The most catastrophic breaches occur when a trusted user, someone possessing authorized credentials, turns against the system from the inside. We call it an insider threat. They are nearly impossible to detect because the security algorithms view their destructive actions as legitimate behavior. Vernon used my trust as a Trojan horse. The full scope of the conspiracy crystallized in my mind. Patricia was the architect. Kendall was the public face. Harper was the proxy. But Vernon was the linchpin. Without his digital complicity, the entire $1.5 million illusion would have crumbled at the very first underwriting hurdle. They were not a dysfunctional family harboring petty jealousies. They were a synchronized syndicate. I stared at my reflection in the mirror again. The woman looking back at me was no longer a daughter seeking common ground. A daughter feels heartbreak. An auditor feels only the cold, sharp edge of liability. The emotional tether tying me to the Gentry name snapped, leaving behind a clean, unburdened clarity. I did not feel the urge to cry, and I did not feel the urge to scream. I felt a profound, dangerous calm. I needed to lock down my perimeter. I tapped the screen of my phone, navigating back to the main security dashboard. I initiated a master reset of my banking credentials. I changed the primary password, wiped the secondary email routing, and activated a biometric lock that required my physical thumbprint for any future account modifications. I severed Vernon's legacy access permanently, locking the inside man out of the system. Just as I finalized the security update, the device vibrated in the palm of my hand. A banner notification dropped down from the top edge of the screen. It was a text message. The sender name displayed at the top was Dad. I did not open the message immediately. I watched the preview text scroll across the digital banner. It took less than 2 seconds to read, but the words carried the weight of a physical blow. So sorry about your mom today, honey. I know she can be difficult. I am proud of you." I read the characters 3 times to ensure my eyes were not deceiving me. The sheer, terrifying sociopathy of the message hung in the sterile air of the restroom. Less than 50 feet away on a sunlit flagstone patio, an imposter was wearing my initials and drinking champagne with the lending officer who had just approved a fraudulent $1 million loan based on documents my father provided. And from the edge of that very same patio, Vernon typed a message designed to soothe my feelings. He was playing the role of the sympathetic ally while actively holding the knife he had just buried in my back. He sent the text to keep me pacified. He wanted to ensure I drove back to New Orleans feeling sorry for him, convinced he was still the quiet, supportive father who had co-signed my college checking account. If I believed he was on my side, I would never suspect him of orchestrating a felony. It was a diversionary tactic, a piece of emotional bait deployed to make the target complacent. I tapped the notification opening the text thread. I stared at the blinking cursor in the reply field. The instinct to type a furious response to confront him with the evidence and watch his carefully constructed facade shatter pulsed through my fingers. It would have been deeply satisfying to type the words, "I know what you did." But a seasoned investigator never alerts the target that an audit is underway. If I confronted Vernon now, he would immediately warn Patricia. Patricia would instruct Harper to destroy the physical notary logs. They would scramble to cover their digital tracks, transfer the loan funds into offshore holding accounts, and frame the discrepancy as a clerical error. I would lose the element of surprise, and in a war against a synchronized syndicate, surprise is the only weapon that guarantees a fatal strike. I deleted the draft. I closed the messaging application without sending a single letter in return. I slid the phone back into my leather purse, snapping the brass clasp shut. The silence in the restroom felt different now. It was no longer the silence of a victim hiding from her abusers. It was the silence of a predator, preparing to dismantle a corrupt ecosystem, piece by piece. I unlocked the deadbolt on the heavy oak door. I was ready to step back out into the sweltering heat. I needed to collect the final pieces of physical evidence, and I needed to do it while they were still celebrating their supposed victory. They thought they had secured their fortune. They had no idea they had just handed the executioner a loaded weapon. I stepped out of the restroom and let the heavy oak door click shut behind me. The hallway stretched forward, lined with framed photographs of past golf tournament champions and antique brass wall sconces. The air conditioning hummed a low, steady drone. A few minutes ago, I walked into that bathroom as a daughter, trying to process a profound personal betrayal. I walked out as a forensic auditor possessing a definitive target. Emotion is a useless currency in the financial sector. Feeling angry does not freeze a bank account. Feeling heartbroken does not void a forged commercial contract. In my profession, the only thing that saves you from total ruin is documentation. I needed a quiet place to secure the digital evidence before returning to the patio. I turned away from the main dining room and navigated down a secondary corridor toward the country club administrative offices. It was Saturday afternoon, meaning the administrative wing was deserted. I found a small alcove featuring a leather armchair and a mahogany side table. I sat down, placed my purse on the floor, and unlocked my phone. The browser window containing the Secretary of State business portal was still open. I had viewed the Uniform Commercial Code filing, but viewing a document on a web browser is insufficient for a formal fraud investigation. Federal authorities require native files. They require the encoded metadata to prove exactly when and where a document was filed. I tapped the download icon, saving the 40-page portable document format file directly to my encrypted local storage drive. I also initiated a secondary backup, routing the file to my secure corporate cloud server in New Orleans. If my family attempted to confiscate or destroy my phone, the evidence would already be sitting in a vault they could never breach. The file downloaded in 3 seconds. I opened it utilizing a specialized document viewer application designed for contract review. Commercial loan deeds follow a rigid, predictable anatomy. The first 20 pages consist of boilerplate definitions outlining the terms of default, the interest rate schedules, and the collateralized asset descriptions. I swiped past the amortization tables and the structural covenants. I did not care about the interest rate Pelican State Bank was charging Gentry and Daughters Heritage Estates. I only cared about the pages where my identity was weaponized. I reached page 38. The bold heading at the top read, "Unconditional Guarantee of Payment and Performance." This was the specific legal instrument that tied my personal financial existence to their reckless venture. I scrolled to the bottom of the page to examine the signature block. Printed beneath a solid black line was my full legal name, my home address, and my social security number with only the last 4 digits visible. Resting on the black line was a signature executed in blue ink. I used my thumb and index finger to magnify the screen, expanding the image until the blue ink filled the entire display. The signature was a forgery, and it was a remarkably sloppy execution. When a person signs their own name, they rely on muscle memory. The pen glides across the paper with a natural fluid momentum, resulting in smooth curves and varying ink pressure. The signature staring back at me possessed none of those characteristics. The blue ink was uniform and heavy, indicating the writer pressed the ballpoint pen firmly into the paper and moved at a slow, deliberate pace. The tall loop of the first letter was rigid and hesitant. The tail of the last letter dragged down at an awkward, unnatural angle. Someone had placed a genuine sample of my handwriting on a desk, perhaps an old tax return provided by my father, and painstakingly attempted to draw my signature rather than write it. To a trained underwriter, the hesitation marks and the forced structural slants were glaringly obvious. But a poorly executed forgery presented a terrifying problem. A commercial lending institution like Pelican State Bank processes thousands of contracts every single week. The clerks scanning these documents into the central database do not possess the training or the time to perform forensic handwriting analysis. They do not compare the wet ink on a new contract against historical signature cards. They look for a different kind of verification. A signature alone is easily contested. If a bank tried to seize my assets based solely on that hesitant blue ink, my legal counsel could challenge the validity of the stroke and tie the bank up in civil litigation for years. Lenders despise civil litigation. It drains resources and delays capital recovery. To insulate themselves from fraud claims, banks require an impenetrable layer of legal armor. They require a sworn officer of the state to witness the signature, verify the identity of the signer, and stamp the document with an official government seal. In the state of Louisiana, a notary public wields immense legal authority. Unlike other jurisdictions where a notary merely acknowledges a signature, a Louisiana civil law notary is granted broad powers akin to a limited attorney. When a notary presses their seal onto a commercial loan deed, that document is instantly elevated to authentic act status. It carries a legal presumption of truth. If a document is notarized, the court assumes the signature is genuine. To defeat a notarized contract, the victim must prove the notary was actively complicit in a criminal conspiracy. My mother understood this legal hurdle. Patricia knew that forging my name in her own dining room would never survive a routine audit. She needed a state-sanctioned official to validate the lie. I moved my finger across the screen, panning to the right side of the signature block. Sitting adjacent to the forged blue ink was a circular digital rendering of an official Louisiana notary seal. It had been stamped in black ink, overlapping the edge of the signature line to prevent the document from being cropped or altered. I magnified the image further. The center of the seal featured the state emblem, a pelican tearing its own breast to feed its young. Encircling the bird was a ring of capitalized text. I read the characters etched into the digital perimeter. State of Louisiana, Parish of Caddo, Notary Public. Just below the circular stamp was the notary signature line, accompanied by a printed name and a unique state commission number. The commission number is a specialized sequence assigned to an individual for life. It tracks every official action they take. I looked at the printed name resting beneath the commission number, Harper Elise Vance. The chilling reality of the stamp settled over me, turning the air in the alcove to ice. Harper had not just played dress-up for a cocktail party. She had not just memorized my professional history to impress a few local real estate developers. She had weaponized her state commission to execute a high-level financial crime. Harper utilized her official capacity as a notary public to legally verify a signature she knew was a forgery. She sat in a room, watched someone draw my name on a $1 million loan document, and then pressed her state seal onto the paper, swearing under penalty of perjury that Fair Gentry was physically present, presented government-issued identification, and signed the deed of her own free will. This elevated the situation far beyond a familial dispute or a simple civil grievance. Falsifying a notarial act on a federally regulated banking document is not a minor infraction. It is a Class B felony. It carries a mandatory prison sentence, the permanent revocation of the notary commission, and severe financial penalties. Harper had strapped herself to the hull of my family's sinking ship, risking her own freedom just to remain in Kendall's good graces. The trap they built to steal my financial future was suddenly exposed as a loaded weapon pointed directly back at their own heads. They assumed my distance and my silence meant I was an easy target. They assumed I would never bother to check the public archives. They assumed they could quietly harvest my credentials, secure their luxury real estate funding, and leave me holding the debt if the venture collapsed. They failed to consider the primary rule of commercial underwriting. Every transaction leaves a receipt. I lowered the phone and let the screen fade to black. The missing pieces of the puzzle were now fully assembled and locked in a secure digital vault. I had the fraudulent prospectus. I had the formal encumbrance filing. I had the forged signature. I had the corrupt notary seal. And I had the digital footprint of the inside man who facilitated the breach. I stood up from the leather armchair and smoothed the front of my skirt. The profound, dangerous calm I felt in the restroom solidified into a sharp, tactical focus. The audit phase of my investigation was officially complete. It was time to return to the patio, look my family in the eye, and collect the final physical evidence required to execute a flawless, fatal strike. I walked away from the administrative wing and headed back toward the noise of the reception. The country club operated like a well-oiled machine. Guests mingled on the sunlit patio while an invisible army of staff worked behind the scenes to keep the illusion intact. I needed to isolate the architect of this fraud. I bypassed the glass double doors leading outside and veered toward the service corridor. The air grew thick with the scent of chafing fuel, roasted tenderloin, and polished silver. The heavy swinging doors of the catering kitchen stood propped open. Patricia stood just inside the threshold, issuing rapid instructions to a young waiter holding a tray of champagne flutes. My mother thrives in environments where she can direct the behavior of others. She wore a tailored ivory blazer that matched Kendall's dress, projecting the image of a wealthy matriarch overseeing her empire. She adjusted a diamond stud in her ear and checked her reflection in the polished stainless steel of a nearby prep table. She looked flawless. She looked like a woman who had never committed a felony in her life. I stepped through the service doors. The clatter of porcelain plates and the hiss of running water provided a chaotic backdrop. Patricia saw me approach and immediately frowned. Her posture stiffened. She dismissed the waiter with a flick of her wrist and turned to face me, clearly annoyed that I had wandered into the staff area instead of quietly fading into the background. I did not offer a greeting. I did not ask how the party was going. I reached into my leather purse and withdrew the folded cardstock. I held the glossy brochure out in front of me, keeping my arm steady. I opened it directly to the executive team profiles and tapped my index finger against the photograph of Harper, smiling next to my professional credentials. I asked her why my sister's best friend was listed as a certified public accountant under my legal name. Patricia did not flinch. She did not drop her champagne glass. She did not feign ignorance or act surprised. A novice liar panics when presented with evidence. A seasoned manipulator assesses the threat level and immediately seeks to control the environment. Patricia grabbed my elbow. Her grip was tight and bruising. She pulled me away from the open doorway, dragging me deeper into the service corridor, where the catering staff could not hear us over the din of the industrial dishwashers. She backed me into a corner near a stack of empty folding chairs. Her eyes darted toward the hallway to ensure no investors had followed me. Once she verified we were alone, she turned her attention back to me. The maternal charm vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating fury. She lowered her voice to a harsh, venomous whisper. She told me to lower my voice and stop trying to embarrass the family. She did not bother denying the contents of the brochure. She treated the printed evidence of her crime as a minor inconvenience rather than a legal catastrophe. I maintained steady eye contact. I stated that the brochure was not the issue. I told her I knew about the Louisiana Secretary of State filings. I told her I knew about the Uniform Commercial Code lien. I told her I knew they secured a $1.5 million commercial development loan using my Social Security number, my tax returns, and a forged notary stamp. For a fraction of a second, the muscles in her jaw twitched. She had not expected me to uncover the structural foundation of the lie so quickly. But the hesitation evaporated instantly. Instead of showing remorse, Patricia went on the offensive. She leaned in close, her expensive perfume mingling with the smell of industrial cleaner. She hissed that I had no idea what kind of pressure they were under. Kendall wanted to launch this luxury real estate firm for years, Patricia explained, but her credit was ruined after her last boutique failed. The commercial lenders laughed them out of the boardroom. The bank required a pristine guarantor. They needed an executive with a flawless financial history and an active state accounting license to underwrite the risk. You were sitting in New Orleans doing nothing with your numbers, Patricia whispered. You have immaculate credit and an empty apartment. We needed capital to get this project off the ground. We just borrowed your credentials to satisfy the lending committee. It is a guaranteed return on investment. The subdivision will sell out in 6 months. We pay back the bank, and your name comes off the paperwork. You will not lose a single dime. I stared at her, processing the staggering magnitude of her delusion. She equated federal wire fraud to borrowing a sweater from a sibling's closet. She genuinely believed she was entitled to my professional achievements. I spent 10 years building a reputation in the commercial finance sector. I sacrificed my youth, my sleep, and my social life to pass rigorous state board exams. Patricia looked at my decade of grueling labor and saw nothing but a convenient asset she could exploit to fund Kendall's fantasy. I asked her if she understood that Harper committed a crime by stamping a forged signature. I asked her if she understood that Vernon committed a crime by intercepting my banking alerts. Patricia waved her hand dismissively, brushing aside federal statutes as if they were suggestions. She told me the paperwork was already finalized and the cash wire was scheduled to clear on Friday at the ribbon-cutting ceremony. She ordered me to put the brochure away, walk back out onto the patio, and play along. She demanded I stand in the background and smile while Harper finished networking with the Pelican State Bank representative. If you walk out there and cause a scene, Patricia warned, her tone dripping with venom, you will ruin your sister's big day. You will destroy this company before it even opens. Do not be the jealous older sister who throws a tantrum because she is not the center of attention. Just keep your mouth shut and let us handle the business. This was the trap. It was a psychological snare designed to neutralize me. Patricia was offering me 2 distinct choices, both of which ended in my destruction. If I raised my voice, demanded the police, and caused a public spectacle in the middle of a country club, Patricia would win. She would immediately pivot to the investors and frame me as the unstable, bitter sibling. She would claim I was having a mental breakdown, that I was obsessed with Kendall, and that I was fabricating stories out of sheer jealousy. The bank representatives would believe the polished, weeping mother over the screaming woman in the hallway. I would be discredited, and the fraud would proceed under the cover of a family tragedy. But if I remained silent, if I swallowed the rage and walked back to my car without reporting the crime, I became legally complicit. In the eyes of federal regulators, failing to report identity theft upon discovery is tantamount to authorizing it. If the luxury real estate market dipped and Gentry & Daughters Heritage Estates defaulted on the $1 million loan, the bank would seize my assets. When I finally claimed fraud, the investigators would ask why I attended the launch party and said nothing. My silence would be interpreted as consent. Patricia watched my face, waiting for me to fold. She had spent 32 years training me to surrender to her demands. She expected the familiar signs of defeat. She looked for the drooping shoulders, the averted gaze, the quiet apology. She expected the daughter to submit. But the daughter was no longer present. I did not avert my gaze. I looked at the woman who gave birth to me, the woman who engineered my financial ruin, and I felt nothing but a chilling clinical detachment. I was evaluating a hostile entity. I was calculating the exact trajectory of her downfall. Patricia misread my silence. She assumed she had won. She let go of my elbow, smoothed the lapels of her ivory blazer, and offered a tight, victorious smile. She delivered the final fatal blow of the conversation. "Family shares everything," Patricia snapped, her voice regaining its polished, authoritative edge. "Stop being dramatic and go back to your car if you cannot support your sister." Stop being dramatic. There it was again, the gaslighting anthem of the Gentry household, the phrase designed to shrink my reality and expand her power. My face went entirely blank. The last remaining fiber of familial obligation severed, cleanly snapping without a sound. When someone tells you that your reality is just theater, they strip away their own right to mercy. Patricia did not view me as a human being. I was a stepping stone, a collateral asset, a signature to be forged and discarded. I realized in that exact moment that they could not be saved. I could not reason with them. I could not warn them of the legal consequences. They were driving at full speed toward a cliff, convinced they were flying. I did not argue. I did not shed a single tear. I slowly folded the brochure and slipped it back into my purse. I looked at Patricia with the hollow, unreadable stare of an auditor finalizing a delinquency report. I stepped backward, leaving her standing in the chaotic noise of the catering kitchen. I turned around and walked down the service corridor, heading toward the parking lot. The emotional hostage negotiation was over. The audit had officially begun. I left the heavy swinging doors of the catering kitchen behind me and navigated the carpeted hallway leading back to the sunlit reception. There is a distinct, intoxicating power in simply walking away. Society conditions us to believe that confrontation requires volume. We are taught that defending our boundaries means shouting our grievances in crowded rooms, demanding apologies, and refusing to leave until the other party admits defeat. But volume is merely a symptom of panic. When you scream, you hand your opponent the script. You give them the opportunity to label you irrational. Patricia expected me to stand in that service corridor and beg for my identity back. She expected a tearful negotiation. By turning my back and walking out, I deprived her of the oxygen she needed to sustain her narrative. I stepped through the glass double doors and onto the flagstone patio. The thick Louisiana heat settled over my shoulders, but my core felt like solid ice. The jazz quartet was playing a lively tempo. Waiters continued to circulate with silver trays of champagne. I did not march to the center of the crowd. I moved quietly along the perimeter, blending into the shadows cast by the striped canvas awnings. I located my targets standing near the outdoor bar. Kendall and Patricia had rejoined the group. They were flanking Harper, presenting a united front of Southern charm and corporate competence. Bradley Thorne, the regional lending officer for Pelican State Bank, was holding a fresh drink and laughing at something my sister said. Harper stood right beside him, shifting her weight onto one hip. She raised her left arm to brush a stray lock of hair behind her ear. The movement exposed the cuff of the navy silk wrap dress. The silver monogram caught the direct glare of the afternoon sun. The letters F and G gleamed against the dark fabric. I reached into my leather purse and withdrew my smartphone. I swiped the screen to bypass the lock and opened the camera application. I verified the flash was disabled. I adjusted the exposure settings to ensure the harsh sunlight would not wash out the fine details of the embroidery. I raised the device, holding it steady with both hands. I framed the shot with forensic precision. I did not want a blurry, ambiguous image. I needed undeniable proof of the impersonation occurring in a professional setting. I aligned the digital grid over Harper. The frame captured her face, the stolen posture the banker standing beside her, and the undeniable silver initials resting on her wrist. I pressed the capture button. The shutter clicked with a quiet, satisfying snap. I took 3 more photographs in rapid succession, securing multiple angles of the fraud in progress. The imposter smiled for the crowd, entirely unaware she had just provided the prosecution with the primary exhibit. I lowered my phone, verified the high-resolution images were saved to my encrypted cloud server, and slipped the device back into my purse. I did not offer a farewell to my father. I did not wave goodbye to my sister. I turned around and walked down the gravel pathway leading to the country club parking lot. The sound of my heels crunching against the crushed stone was the only noise accompanying my exit. My sedan was parked under the wide, sprawling branches of an ancient live oak tree. The shade provided a temporary respite from the blistering heat. I unlocked the door, slid into the driver's seat, and pulled the heavy door shut. The thick automotive glass severed the ambient noise of the reception, plunging the cabin into a deep, insulated quiet. I inserted the key into the ignition and started the engine. The air conditioning roared to life, blowing cold air across my face. I gripped the steering wheel and looked at the country club one last time through the rearview mirror. The white columns of the clubhouse stood tall and proud, projecting an image of legacy and wealth that masked the rot festering inside. I shifted the car into drive and navigated out of the gravel lot, turning onto the paved county road. I left my family behind to celebrate a victory that was already unraveling. The journey from Shreveport to New Orleans requires 6 hours of driving straight down Interstate 49. It is a long, monotonous stretch of highway that cuts through the heart of the state. As the miles rolled by, the landscape outside my window began to shift. The manicured lawns and rolling hills of northern Louisiana slowly gave way to the dense, untamed swamps and sprawling bayous of the south. The sun began its descent, casting long, fractured shadows across the asphalt. That 6-hour drive served as a psychological crucible. With every mile marker I passed, I shed another layer of the familial guilt I had carried for over 3 decades. For my entire life, I played the role of the quiet, compliant daughter. I was the child who absorbed the slights, swallowed the unfair comparisons, and lowered my gaze to keep the peace in the Gentry household. I allowed Patricia to dictate the terms of our relationship because I believed enduring her cruelty was the price of admission for her love. I realized, staring at the fading highway lines, that her love was never on the table. I was an underwriter in every sense of the word. I existed to absorb their risk. I watched the sky turn from bruised purple to pitch black. The headlights of oncoming semi-trucks illuminated the dark cabin of my sedan in brief, rhythmic flashes. I thought about the people I left behind on that flagstone patio. I knew exactly what they were doing right now. Patricia was likely drinking a 3rd glass of champagne, congratulating herself on a masterful performance. She believed her reprimand in the catering kitchen had successfully neutralized the threat. Kendall was likely dreaming about her luxury corner office, convinced her fake real estate empire was secure. Vernon was likely sitting near the bar, nursing a bourbon, and telling himself he did what he had to do to keep his wife happy. They believed they had won. They thought the quiet sister folded under the pressure of their collective expectations. It is a fatal flaw of narcissistic personalities. They always mistake silence for submission. They assume that because you are not screaming, you are not fighting back. They fail to understand that the most dangerous opponents do not waste energy on theatrical displays. They conserve their resources, gather their intelligence, and strike when the target is most vulnerable. I was no longer Fair the daughter. I was Fair the certified public accountant. I was the lead commercial auditor. I became the clinical assassin my mother inadvertently trained me to be. She taught me how to detach my emotions from my actions. Now I would use that very same detachment to dismantle her life. I arrived in New Orleans well past 10 o'clock at night. The city greeted me with its signature, heavy, electric humidity. The air smelled of damp earth and river water. I pulled into the secure parking garage of my apartment building, turned off the engine, and took the elevator up to my floor. I unlocked my front door and stepped into the familiar sanctuary of my home. The apartment was cool and still. I did not turn on the overhead lights. The only illumination came from the amber glow of the street lamps filtering through the slats of the window blinds, casting long, horizontal shadows across the hardwood floor. I dropped my keys on the counter and walked straight to my home office. I sat down at my glass desk and opened my laptop. The screen woke up, casting a harsh, pale blue light across my face. A lesser person might have opened a social media application to post a passive-aggressive status update. A weaker person might have drafted a long, tearful email to the family group chat demanding an apology. I did none of those things. I opened a secure, encrypted web browser. I navigated past the public banking interfaces and loaded the designated Federal Commercial Underwriter portal. The screen prompted me for my secure credentials and my dual-factor authentication token. I rested my fingers on the keyboard, listening to the quiet hum of the city outside my window. The evidence was secured. The perimeter was locked. I typed my password into the prompt, pressed enter, and crossed the digital threshold to initiate the financial execution. There is a distinct beauty in dramatic irony. When a predator hunts in the wild, the prey usually hears the snap of a twig or the rustle of dry leaves before the strike. But when a commercial underwriter hunts the prey, hears nothing at all. Over the next 3 weeks, I became a ghost, haunting the digital architecture of my own family. I did not return to Shreveport. I did not answer their phone calls. I sat in the quiet sanctuary of my New Orleans apartment, listening to the summer rain strike the window glass, and I initiated a slow death judgment. To dismantle a real estate development firm, you do not need to attack the founders directly. You only need to attack their supply chain. Commercial construction relies entirely on the fluid movement of credit. When a developer breaks ground on a new subdivision, they do not pay for the raw materials with actual cash. They hire subcontractors to pour the concrete foundations and frame the timber structures. These vendors extend net 30 credit lines to the developer based on the assumed security of the primary bank loan. If a concrete supplier believes $1 million bank wire is guaranteed, they will happily dump thousands of gallons of cement into the dirt and wait a month for the invoice to clear. But if that supplier senses even a fraction of financial instability, they will freeze the account and halt the trucks. I opened my laptop and bypassed the internal banking portals. Striking the Pelican State Bank loan right away would have ended the game prematurely. I wanted my mother and sister to bleed capital first. I wanted them to feel the walls closing in before the roof collapsed. I accessed the Caddo Parish Public Permit Registry. By cross-referencing the lot numbers assigned to Gentry and Daughters Heritage Estates, I identified their primary material vendors. They were utilizing a regional concrete supplier and a prominent wholesale lumber distributor based out of Baton Rouge. I created a masked corporate compliance email address, routing it through a secure encrypted server. I drafted a formal risk advisory notice and sent it to the accounts receivable departments of both vendors. I did not accuse my family of a crime. That would invite legal scrutiny and slow the process down. I merely attached a copy of the pending Uniform Commercial Code lien and informed the vendors that the listed guarantor was currently undergoing a federal identity verification audit. In the credit risk industry, uncertainty is far more lethal than a denied application. A vendor will not risk pouring $40,000 worth of concrete for a company that might have its assets frozen by federal regulators. The dominoes began to fall 72 hours later. I monitored the collapse with clinical fascination. When I locked down my banking security, I did not block my family on my cellular device. I simply muted their notification alerts, allowing their messages to filter into my phone like a daily intelligence briefing. I wanted to watch their internal communications as the pressure mounted. On Tuesday morning, the first signs of panic appeared in the family group chat. Kendall sent a frantic text asking Patricia why the grading crews were sitting idle at the construction site. She typed that the site manager was furious because the cement trucks had failed to arrive for the scheduled morning pour. An hour later, Patricia responded. Her tone was dismissive and arrogant. She blamed the delay on a clerical glitch with the vendor billing software. She assured Kendall that she was handling it and told her not to worry about the logistics. But administrative glitches do not freeze supply chains. By Thursday afternoon, the tone in the group text shifted from annoyance to genuine desperation. The wholesale lumber distributor suspended their delivery schedule entirely. They sent Patricia a formal notice demanding a cash deposit for all framing materials before dispatching a single truck. I sat at my glass desk, reading the messages as they illuminated my screen. Kendall was spiraling. She typed long paragraphs questioning why their vendors were suddenly treating them like a severe credit risk. She asked if the bank had leaked something about their liquidity. Patricia replied with shorter and shorter sentences. She demanded that everyone remain calm. She stated that she would cover the material costs out of pocket to keep the crews working until the bank funds cleared. That was the exact reaction I was counting on. Without the vendor credit lines, my mother was forced to liquidate her personal cash reserves to prevent the construction workers from walking off the job. She was paying exorbitant hourly labor rates to keep men standing around empty dirt lots, waiting for materials that were never going to arrive. They were draining their own checking accounts to sustain the illusion of a functioning business. The dissonance between their private financial ruin and their public image provided a staggering psychological case study. I observed Kendall through her social media channels. While she was hyperventilating in the private text thread, she continued to post highly curated photographs on her public profiles. She uploaded pictures of herself standing on the empty Shreveport lots, wearing a hard hat and a designer blazer. She applied bright, cheerful filters to the images and typed optimistic captions about the high demand causing slight groundbreaking delays. She was performing success for an audience of local investors while quietly suffocating behind the screen. Vernon remained suspiciously quiet throughout the 3-week ordeal. He occasionally contributed a vague word of encouragement to the group chat, but he offered no actionable solutions. I knew exactly why my father was silent. He was sitting in his house, sweating through his shirts, wondering if his digital intercept protocol had failed. He was likely logging into his dummy email account every hour, checking for alerts, and finding nothing but empty folders. He could not express his true anxiety to Patricia or Kendall without revealing the fragile nature of his technical espionage. He was trapped in his own lie, watching the ship take on water and lacking the courage to sound the alarm. They had no idea I was the one cutting off their oxygen. Patricia had always dismissed my career as boring arithmetic, devoid of creativity or power. She failed to realize that arithmetic governs the physical world. I did not need to raise my voice to halt her concrete trucks. I did not need to throw a tantrum to sever her supply lines. I only needed to alter a few variables in the risk equation. The calendar marched forward with ruthless efficiency. The delays in the bleeding capital cornered my family, leaving them desperate for the final payday. They placed all their hopes on the upcoming Friday. Friday was the scheduled date for the grand opening ribbon-cutting ceremony. Patricia had rented a sprawling event tent to be erected on the primary construction site. She invited the local press, city council members, and the Shreveport elite. The event was designed to be a glittering display of Southern wealth and corporate triumph. But a white canvas tent and expensive floral arrangements cannot mask a stalled foundation forever. They needed the $1.5 million cash injection to survive the month. I reviewed the Pelican State Bank commercial disbursement protocol. A loan of that magnitude is never finalized through a digital signature alone. The initial recorded video verification secured the committee approval and established the credit lien, but the release of the actual funds required a final, uncompromising condition. To initiate the cash wire transfer, the bank demanded a physical, wet ink signature from the primary guarantor. The document had to be executed in person on the day of closing, and it had to be validated by a licensed notary public acting as a sworn witness. My mother had orchestrated the entire Friday event around this final transaction. The bank representative, Bradley Thorne, was scheduled to attend the ribbon cutting. He would bring the final closing documents in a leather portfolio. My family needed Harper to stand under that event tent, wearing my face, and forge my name one last time in front of a crowd of witnesses. They needed her state notary stamp to strike the paper and unlock the vault. They were building a massive public stage for their own execution. They were gathering the press, the investors, and the lending officers in one location to witness a federal crime. They believed the finish line was mere inches away. They had no idea I was already standing there waiting for them. It rained the morning of the grand opening. I drove the 6 hours north from New Orleans to Shreveport in deliberate silence. The rhythmic rhythm of the windshield wipers served as a steady metronome for the impending execution. My mother originally planned to host this event under a sprawling canvas tent on the primary construction site, but a stalled dirt lot devoid of concrete foundations and lumber framing does not inspire investor confidence. To mask the catastrophic delays caused by their frozen supply chains, Patricia relocated the ceremony to the grand ballroom of the Shreveport Country Club. The irony was exquisite. They were forced to rent a luxury venue to celebrate a real estate empire because they could not afford to pave their own driveway. I bypassed the main entrance and utilized the catering corridor to slip into the ballroom unseen. I wore a tailored black suit and pulled my hair back into a severe, sensible style. I did not look like a disgruntled family member seeking revenge. I looked like a corporate auditor arriving to conduct a routine compliance check. I positioned myself in the back corner of the room, standing behind a towering floral arrangement of white hydrangeas. The thick foliage provided a perfect blind spot, allowing me to observe the entire stage without stepping into the peripheral vision of the guests. The ballroom was an elaborate stage production designed to project effortless wealth. Crystal chandeliers illuminated ice sculptures and silver trays piled high with imported caviar. Local journalists and real estate bloggers stood near the front row holding cameras with large flash attachments. Wealthy investors and city council members gathered near a raised platform draped in red velvet. Patricia orchestrated the room with the precision of a seasoned field general. She wore a bright crimson dress that commanded attention, shaking hands and offering bright, hollow laughs to the politicians. Vernon stood a few feet behind her. His posture told a very different story. He wore a strained, rigid smile, and his eyes darted toward the entrance every few minutes. He was sweating despite the heavy air conditioning. Vernon knew their concrete vendors had frozen their accounts. He knew their construction crews were sitting idle. He was waiting for a financial miracle to rescue him from the consequences of his own digital espionage. He needed the bank funds to clear today, or the entire operation would default by Monday morning. Bradley Thorne, the regional lending officer for Pelican State Bank, stood near the edge of the stage. He was flanked by two senior executives from the corporate underwriting division. They wore crisp navy suits and exuded institutional authority. Bradley held a thick leather portfolio tucked under his left arm. The $1.5 million wire transfer required one final, uncompromising step. The bank needed a wet signature on the final closing authorization, and they needed a licensed notary public to physically stamp the paper in their presence to authorize the digital release of funds. Harper stood near Kendall, preparing to play her role for the final time. Harper wore a slate gray blazer, maintaining the reserved, stolen posture she had practiced for months. She held her official Louisiana notary stamp in her right hand. It was a small, cylindrical device made of black plastic, but it represented the legal instrument of her own destruction. She was preparing to press that seal onto a federal banking document to verify a fraudulent identity while standing in a room full of witnesses. I reached into the inner pocket of my suit jacket and withdrew my smartphone. I bypassed the lock screen and opened my encrypted email application. 3 days ago, sitting in the quiet shadows of my apartment, I drafted a highly specific message. The recipient line contained a direct corporate address. It was addressed to a man named Vincent. Vincent is the chief risk officer for Pelican State Bank. I sat across from him during a syndicated loan audit 2 years prior. Vincent is a man devoid of sentimentality. He does not care about family dynamics, public relations, or the political optics of a real estate launch. He cares solely about institutional liability. If a commercial loan portfolio exhibits even a fraction of a % of fraudulent exposure, Vincent amputates the compromised asset without hesitation. He operates like a machine, prioritizing the survival of the bank over all other variables. The subject line of my drafted email read, "Urgent fraud alert regarding Gentry LLC loan disbursement." The body of the message was brief, clinical, and stripped of all emotion. I stated my legal name, my permanent address, and my certified public accountant state license number. I informed him that the guarantor identity on the pending $1.5 million development loan was a fabrication. I attached 3 critical files to the message. The first file was a high-resolution color scan of my official United States passport, displaying my verified signature in dark ink. The second file was the downloaded Uniform Commercial Code lien, featuring the hesitant forged blue ink and the corrupt notary seal. The third file was the photograph I captured on the country club patio, showing the imposter wearing my monogrammed initials while drinking champagne with Bradley Thorn. The email contained undeniable forensic proof of a synchronized criminal syndicate operating under the guise of a family business. A microphone whined with a brief, sharp burst of feedback, drawing my attention back to the stage. The crowd quieted down. Patricia stepped up to the acrylic podium. She adjusted the microphone and delivered a polished speech about Southern heritage, traditional family values, and building a community legacy that would last for generations. Every sentence she spoke was a carefully constructed lie. She smiled at the cameras and gestured toward her daughters. She looked directly at Harper and called her by my name, publicly thanking her for being the financial rock of the organization. The investors applauded. Bradley Thorn nodded in deep approval, proud of the rigorous vetting his team had supposedly conducted. Kendall stepped forward holding a pair of oversized ceremonial scissors with gleaming gold handles. A thick red ribbon was stretched across the front of the stage, held taut by 2 local politicians. Harper moved toward a small mahogany table positioned right next to the podium. Bradley Thorn unzipped his leather portfolio and laid the final disbursement authorization document flat on the hard wooden surface. He reached into his breast pocket and handed Harper a heavy black fountain pen. The room swelled with a thick, electric anticipation. Photographers raised their cameras, adjusting their lenses and waiting for the perfect ceremonial shot. This was the exact moment Patricia had engineered for over half a year. This was the moment they secured the capital to cover their bleeding supply lines and legitimize their stolen empire. I looked down at the glowing screen of my phone. My thumb hovered a fraction of an inch above the blue send button. Patricia leaned into the microphone and initiated a countdown for the press. 3. Harper uncapped the fountain pen, placed her hand on the mahogany table, and pressed the metal tip to the signature line. 2. Kendall opened the sharp blades of the ceremonial scissors, aligning the polished steel directly with the center of the taut red ribbon. 1. I pressed my thumb against the glass screen. The draft vanished from my outbox. The encrypted data packets hurtled through the digital ether, traveling instantly to the Pelican State Bank executive servers in Baton Rouge. Kendall snapped the gold handles together. The steel blades sliced cleanly through the fabric. The red ribbon fell to the polished hardwood floor in 2 separate pieces. The crowd erupted into thunderous applause. The camera flashes fired in a blinding rapid sequence of white light, capturing the triumphant smiles of a family that believed they had just won the lottery. But beneath the noise of the clapping hands, the cheering politicians, and the clicking camera shutters, a very different sound echoed through the front row of the audience. It was a synchronized, mechanical vibration. Bradley Thorn reached into his suit jacket. The 2 senior banking executives standing right next to him performed the exact same motion. Their corporate smartphones buzzed in unison. An automated fraud freeze override, directed from the desk of the chief risk officer, bypasses all local branch protocols and immediately alerts the attending agents. The executives pulled their devices out and looked at their screens. The applause in the ballroom continued to echo off the crystal chandeliers, but the faces of the 3 men holding the $1.5 million wire transfer drained of all color. I did not stay to watch the blood drain from their faces. The moment Bradley Thorne and his associates stared down at their buzzing screens, I turned my back on the stage. I slipped out through the catering corridor, retracing my steps past the industrial dishwashers and the prep tables. The sound of the clapping crowd faded behind the heavy swinging doors. I walked out into the gray, rainy afternoon, unlocked my sedan, and drove away from the Shreveport Country Club. The drive back to New Orleans was enveloped in a profound, beautiful silence. There was no music on the radio. The steady sweep of the windshield wipers cleared the rain from the glass, mirroring the clarity settling over my mind. For the first time in 32 years, I was no longer waiting for the next familial crisis to detonate. I had handed the detonator to a federal lending institution, and I knew exactly how they operated. The weekend passed with agonizing, deliberate normalcy. I woke up on Saturday morning at 6, brewed a pot of dark roast coffee, and sat by the window watching the streetcars roll down St. Charles Avenue. To understand my ability to detach, you have to understand my sanctuary. My apartment is a reflection of my profession. It is organized, quiet, and governed by strict routines. The walls are painted a stark, clean white, and the furniture features sharp, minimalist lines. Patricia always hated my living space, calling it sterile and devoid of personality. She preferred homes filled with imported rugs, loud guests, and constant chaotic energy. My mother equated chaos with importance. Kendall thrived in that same environment, constantly creating theatrical emergencies so our parents could rush in and bail her out. I equated order with survival. While my mother and sister were likely spending their Saturday mornings screaming at bank representatives, demanding answers about a canceled wire transfer and a ruined grand opening, I went for a 5-mile run through the Garden District. I bought fresh groceries at the local market. I read a novel on my balcony, listening to the distant horns of the riverboats. I treated the weekend as a standard, unremarkable break from my corporate responsibilities. Monday arrived with the usual hum of the commercial finance sector. I put on a tailored gray suit, walked into my downtown office building, and sat at my glass desk. The contrast between my reality and the nightmare unfolding in northern Louisiana was stark. I spent the morning reviewing legitimate equipment leases and authentic municipal bonds. I drank mediocre office coffee and attended a midday strategy meeting regarding interest rate fluctuations. I behaved as if nothing had happened, because in my physical world, nothing had. But in the digital realm, the banking system was moving with ruthless, terrifying efficiency. When a chief risk officer like Vincent receives undeniable proof of identity theft, accompanied by a corrupted notary seal, the response is not a polite inquiry. It is an immediate, localized quarantine. Pelican State Bank would have locked the $1.5 million account within seconds of my email landing in his inbox. The scheduled cash wire was canceled before Harper even lifted the fountain pen from the mahogany table. The internal fraud department was activated, triggering a mandatory protocol that involves locking all associated credit lines and notifying state regulatory boards. Vincent would have frozen the routing numbers tied to Gentry and Daughters' heritage estates, effectively turning their corporate checking accounts into dead ledgers. Furthermore, a notary falsifying an authentic act on a commercial loan automatically elevates the issue from a civil dispute to a criminal investigation. The bank legal counsel would be drafting immediate referrals to the state attorney general and federal authorities. My family was bleeding out on the operating table, and the surgeons had just walked out of the room, locking the door behind them. The fallout finally breached my perimeter on Tuesday morning. I was sitting at my desk reviewing a dense soil stability report for a commercial warehouse project when the digital clock in the corner of my monitor turned to 10:14. My smartphone, resting face up next to my keyboard, illuminated. The caller identification displayed my mother's name. The device vibrated against the glass surface, producing a low, rhythmic hum. I did not reach for it. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and watched the screen. It rang until it routed to voicemail. 10 seconds later, the screen lit up again. It was Kendall. Then it was Patricia again. Then Kendall. Toxic panic operates on a very predictable schedule. The perpetrator will attempt to handle the crisis internally, believing they can lie or charm their way out of the consequence. When the institution refuses to yield, the perpetrator turns their focus to the victim, desperate to silence the alarm. The relentless flashing of my phone indicated that Pelican State Bank had officially informed Gentry & Daughters Heritage Estates why the funds were withheld. The bank told them the true guarantor had flagged the transaction as fraudulent, presenting photographic and forensic evidence. I watched the missed call counter climb with clinical fascination. The device did not stop vibrating for 3 hours. By 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the tally reached 67 missed calls. The silent screen was a monument to their collapsing empire. They were drowning, and they were slamming their fists against the glass, demanding I throw them a life preserver. Following the barrage of phone calls, the text messages began to pour in. They did not contain apologies. They contained variations of the same frantic manipulation tactics I had endured since childhood. Kendall accused me of being a sociopath, typing in all capital letters that I was ruining her life over a piece of paper. Patricia demanded I call the bank immediately to clear up a simple clerical misunderstanding, attempting to reframe federal wire fraud as a minor administrative error. I read the messages as they appeared on the banner notifications, refusing to open the application so they would not receive a read receipt. Then a final voicemail notification popped onto the screen. The accompanying audio file originated from my father. Vernon had remained silent throughout the weekend and the initial Monday fallout. His silence was the hallmark of a coward, hoping the storm would pass over his head. But the tone of this voicemail shattered his carefully constructed facade of the passive, well-meaning bystander. I tapped the play button, lifting the phone to my ear while keeping my eyes fixed on the spreadsheets illuminating my monitor. His voice was unrecognizable. The calm, soothing cadence he used to placate my mother was gone, replaced by a ragged, breathless panic. He was not calling to offer a sympathetic ear or a gentle suggestion. He sounded terrified. "Fair, you have to answer the phone," Vernon gasped. The audio was filled with the sound of wind and a roaring engine, indicating he was speaking through a vehicle Bluetooth system. "You do not understand what is happening up here. The bank forwarded your email to the state attorney general. The FBI field office in Shreveport just contacted Harper. They are demanding she surrender her notary logbooks and her state seal. They are threatening to raid her office. Kendall is losing her mind. Patricia is talking about hiring defense attorneys. We are losing everything." He paused, taking a sharp, ragged breath. The background noise of the highway engine whined at a high pitch. I realized he was driving at a high rate of speed. "You cannot do this to your own flesh and blood," Vernon shouted, his voice cracking under the immense weight of his own guilt. "We are getting on Interstate 49 right now. We are driving to New Orleans. We are coming to your office, and you are going to fix this. Do not leave the building." The voicemail ended with a sharp digital click, returning my office to a pristine, quiet calm. I lowered the phone to the desk. The mask of the good father had melted away, revealing a desperate accomplice terrified of federal prison. He was not driving south to apologize. He was driving south to corner his daughter, hoping physical intimidation and public embarrassment would force me to retract the evidence. I looked at the digital clock on my monitor. The drive from Shreveport to New Orleans requires 6 hours. They were already on the highway. They were bringing the wreckage of their criminal syndicate directly to the lobby of my corporate underwriting firm. I did not feel a spike of fear. I did not consider calling building security to revoke their access. I reached for my computer mouse and navigated to my daily calendar. I checked my afternoon schedule, noting a free block of time at 4 o'clock. I picked up my desk phone and dialed the extension for the executive assistant managing the floor. I requested she reserve the primary glass-walled conference room for a personal meeting at 4:30. My family believed they could ambush me in my own environment. They assumed bringing their chaos into my professional sanctuary would force me to surrender. They failed to realize they were driving 6 hours to walk into an arena governed by logic, contracts, and uncompromising reality. The trap was set, and the prey was rushing headlong toward the steel jaws. The collision of two opposing worlds always produces a distinct friction. My family thrived in the murky, subjective waters of emotional manipulation, where truths were flexible and volume determined the victor. My world, the realm of commercial underwriting, existed in the harsh, unforgiving light of verified data. My father promised they were driving to New Orleans on Tuesday afternoon. He delivered on that promise, arriving in the city long after sunset. But my residential complex utilizes a dual-layer biometric security gate and a secure parking garage. Their attempts to ambush me at my home were rendered entirely futile. They spent Tuesday night pounding on a reinforced steel barricade before retreating to a nearby hotel, allowing their collective panic to steep for 12 long hours. Wednesday morning provided their next opportunity. The corporate lobby of my commercial underwriting firm unlocks its heavy glass doors to the public at exactly 8 in the morning. I was seated at my desk at 9, wearing a tailored charcoal suit and cross-referencing municipal bond yields on my dual monitors. I felt a profound sense of equilibrium. The digital phone on my console chimed, emitting a low, urgent tone. I pressed the speaker button. The voice of my executive assistant, Sarah, filled the quiet office. Her tone carried a distinct, uncomfortable edge. She informed me that 3 individuals claiming to be my immediate family members were standing in the main reception area. She stated they were refusing to leave, ignoring the visitor protocols, and beginning to raise their voices at the building's security personnel. I did not sigh. I did not express frustration. I thanked Sarah, saved my spreadsheet, and stood up from my ergonomic chair. I walked down the carpeted corridor toward the front of the building. The environment of a financial institution is designed to project stability. The walls are lined with frosted glass, the lighting is soft and recessed, and conversations are conducted in hushed, respectful tones. I pushed through the interior security doors and stepped onto the polished marble floor of the main lobby. Patricia, Kendall, and Vernon were clustered near the reception desk. Harper was conspicuously absent, likely trapped in Shreveport dealing with the federal agents demanding her notary logbooks. Patricia wore a wrinkled trench coat over clothes that looked like they had been slept in. The pristine, victorious ivory blazer from the country club was gone. She was preparing to deploy her ultimate defense mechanism. When Patricia saw me step into the lobby, she inhaled a sharp, ragged breath and pressed a crumpled tissue to her face. She ensured her voice carried across the marble floor, intentionally elevating her volume to reach the ears of 3 junior financial analysts waiting near the elevator bank. Fair, she sobbed her pitch, modulating to hit the exact frequency of maternal heartbreak. Why are you doing this to your sister? You are destroying her life over a simple misunderstanding. We can fix this if you just drop this vindictive vendetta and call the bank. This is a highly calculated tactic known as weaponized public embarrassment. Toxic individuals rely heavily on the unwritten social contract. They assume you value your professional reputation more than you value your personal boundaries. They believe that if they create a humiliating scene in your professional sanctuary, you will surrender to their demands simply to make the screaming stop. They use public venues as leverage, holding your dignity hostage until you sign the ransom note. I shifted my gaze to Kendall. The vibrant, ambitious founder of Gentry & Daughters Heritage Estates looked hollowed out. Her designer makeup was smudged, revealing the exhausted, terrified woman underneath the facade. She stood behind our mother with her arms crossed tight against her chest, shivering despite the warmth of the building. She was facing the very real prospect of federal wire fraud charges, and the reality had finally punctured her arrogance. Vernon hovered near the security desk, refusing to meet my eye. The man who orchestrated the digital interception of my banking alerts now looked like a pedestrian who had wandered into oncoming traffic. The threat of a Federal Bureau of Investigation inquiry had fractured his resolve. He was sweating profusely, shifting his weight from foot to foot, looking for an exit he knew he could not take. I did not rush forward to hush them. I did not whisper frantic apologies or try to drag them into a private corner to mitigate the damage. I stood on the polished marble floor, my hands resting loosely at my sides, and let the silence stretch. I let the junior analysts watch. I let the security guards observe the performance. When you refuse to react to a public tantrum, you strip the manipulator of their power. You are disrupting a federal financial institution, I said. My voice did not rise above a flat conversational volume. If you continue to raise your voice, the guards will not ask you to leave. They will physically remove you for trespassing. Patricia lowered the tissue. Her theatrical sobbing halted for a fraction of a second, replaced by genuine shock. She expected me to crumble under the gaze of my coworkers. "How can you be so cold?" she asked, her voice trembling with manufactured grief. "We are your family. We are trying to save your sister from going to federal prison." I did not answer her question. I turned my attention to the front desk. Sarah was hovering near her terminal, her hand resting inches from the security panic button. "Sarah," I said, maintaining my steady cadence, "please secure conference room A for the next hour. Cancel my 10 o'clock risk assessment call." I instructed my family to wait in the lobby. I turned my back on them, an action that carries its own specific psychological weight, and walked back to my desk. I opened the bottom drawer of my locked filing cabinet. I bypassed the current client portfolios and extracted a single, heavy manila folder. I had prepared this physical dossier the night I returned from Shreveport. The folder possessed a tangible, satisfying weight. It contained printed copies of the Public Archives, the Uniform Commercial Code lien, the forged blue signature, the corrupt notary seal, and the digital access logs exposing my father. It held the complete forensic anatomy of their ruin. I did not want to rely on digital screens for this conversation. I wanted them to feel the paper. I wanted them to see the ink. I returned to the lobby carrying the folder tucked under my arm. "Follow me," I instructed. I did not check over my shoulder to see if they obeyed. I knew they would follow. They had driven 6 hours to secure a lifeline, and I was the only person holding a rope. I led them down a long central corridor. The architecture of my firm is deliberately designed to project transparency and corporate accountability. The walls dividing the executive suites from the central bullpen are constructed entirely of thick, soundproof glass. We refer to Conference Room A as the aquarium. It sits in the very center of the floor. Everyone in the office can see inside, but the heavy acoustic paneling ensures no one outside the room can hear a single word spoken within it. I swiped my security badge against the card reader mounted on the aluminum doorframe. The electronic magnetic lock disengaged with a heavy, satisfying click. I pushed the heavy glass door open and gestured for them to enter. The conference room featured a long rectangular table constructed of brushed steel and tempered glass. Black leather ergonomic chairs lined the perimeter. There were no pictures on the walls. There were no warm colors or decorative rugs. It was an environment stripped of warmth, sentiment, and emotional padding. It was an interrogation room disguised as a corporate meeting space. Patricia hesitated at the threshold. The tears stopped flowing completely. The theatrical sobbing vanished, replaced by a rigid, defensive posture. She looked into the room and recognized it for exactly what it was. It was not a therapist office where she could weave a narrative of victimhood and shared blame. It was a corporate arena. It was a space designed for hostile audits and forensic dismemberment. She stepped inside, her heels clicking nervously against the polished floor. Kendall followed her, keeping her head down, avoiding the gaze of the analysts working at the desks outside the glass. Vernon walked in last, his shoulders slumped in quiet defeat. I stepped into the room behind them and let the heavy glass door swing shut. The rubber acoustic seal clicked into place instantly, cutting off the ambient noise of the office. The silence inside the room was total and suffocating. It neutralized their volume. It stripped away their ability to perform for a crowd. I walked to the head of the glass table, placed the heavy manila folder down on the smooth surface, and looked at the family who never should have forged my name. The heavy acoustic door sealed shut with a soft click, severing the room from the low hum of the corporate bullpen. The silence that followed was dense and immediate. Through the thick glass walls, the junior analysts and administrative assistants were visible, their fingers moving across keyboards and their mouths forming words. But no sound penetrated our space. We were standing inside a transparent vault. My family could see the professional world functioning around them, but they could not scream for help. They were isolated in my arena. Patricia did not wait for me to sit down. She placed her designer handbag on the brushed steel table and crossed her arms. Her posture remained rigid, clinging to the fading illusion of her maternal authority. She looked around the stark, undecorated conference room and offered a derisive scoff, attempting to project confidence she no longer possessed. "Pick up the phone," Patricia ordered. Her voice echoed slightly against the bare walls. "Call the lending officers at Pelican State Bank right now. You are going to tell them this was a simple administrative misunderstanding. You will inform the fraud department that you authorized the paperwork and that the corporate structure is legitimate. If you clear this up today, the bank will release the wire transfer by tomorrow morning and we can save the project." I did not reach for the phone resting in the center of the table. I did not offer a rebuttal to her absurd demand. I pulled out one of the black ergonomic chairs and sat down at the head of the table. I placed the thick manila folder on the glass surface. I unwound the red string securing the flap and flipped the cover open. "You do not seem to grasp the environment you just walked into," I said. My tone remained flat, devoid of the emotional static that usually accompanied our conversations. "You are treating a federal banking institution like a retail store where you can complain to the manager and demand a refund. You are no longer navigating a family dispute. You are standing in the blast radius of a financial crime." I reached into the folder and extracted a single sheet of printed paper. I placed my fingertips on the edges and slid it across the smooth glass. It glided silently, coming to a stop directly in front of Patricia. She looked down at the document. It was a printed copy of Title 18, United States Code, Section 1343. "Read the highlighted text," I instructed. Patricia tightened her jaw and refused to look at the paper. I did not wait for her compliance. I recited the statute from memory. "Whoever, having devised or intending to devise any scheme or artifice to defraud, transmits or causes to be transmitted by means of wire communication in interstate commerce any writings for the purpose of executing such scheme shall be fined or imprisoned not more than 20 years. I reached into the folder and pulled out the second piece of evidence. It was the high-resolution color photograph I captured on the country club patio. The image clearly displayed Harper wearing the navy silk dress with my silver initials on the cuff, laughing with Bradley Thorne. I slid the photograph across the glass, positioning it right next to the federal statute. "You utilized a video conference platform to deceive a federally insured lending institution," I explained, watching the color begin to drain from my mother's face. "You instructed an imposter to present herself as a licensed, certified public accountant to secure capital. That act alone satisfies the criteria for wire fraud." The moment Harper smiled into that webcam and stated my legal name, you triggered a federal investigation. Kendall leaned forward, staring at the photograph of her best friend. Her hands began to tremble. She reached out and touched the glossy paper, recognizing the exact moment her real estate empire turned into a crime scene. "But Harper said the bank verified everything," Kendall whispered, her voice fracturing. "She said the Zoom call was approved." "The bank approved the visual verification because they assumed the physical paperwork would match," I replied. I reached into the folder for the third time. I retrieved the magnified printout of the Uniform Commercial Code lien. The hesitant, forged blue ink of my signature sat directly next to the crisp black circle of the Louisiana notary seal. I slid the legal document across the table. It came to rest in front of Kendall. "This is the fatal error," I said, shifting my gaze to my sister. "Forging a signature is a desperate act. Stamping a forged signature with an official government commission is institutional sabotage. The state of Louisiana grants a notary public extraordinary legal power. When Harper pressed her seal onto this loan deed, she swore an oath under penalty of perjury that I was physically present in the room. Falsifying an authentic act on a commercial contract elevates this from a civil penalty to a Class B felony." Kendall pulled her hand back from the table as if the paper had burned her skin. She looked up at Patricia, her eyes wide with mounting terror. Mom, Kendall stammered, her breathing growing shallow. The FBI agents who called Harper this morning, they said she was facing prison time. They demanded she turn over her ledger. Patricia gripped the edge of the glass table, her knuckles turning white. She refused to break eye contact with me. Harper is a weak girl, Patricia hissed, her tone venomous. We will hire a defense attorney. We will say Harper acted on her own. We will say she forged the documents to steal a commission. You cannot frame the notary, I said, shifting my attention to the man standing near the door. Vernon had remained entirely silent since entering the conference room. He stood near the acoustic seal, staring at the carpet, praying I would leave him out of the execution. I did not grant him that mercy. I withdrew the final stack of paper from the manila folder. It was a digital access ledger printed directly from my personal banking portal. It detailed the dates, timestamps, and Internet Protocol routing addresses for every login attempt executed over the past 6 months. I slid the ledger down the center of the table. In order to process the loan, the bank required my verified tax returns, I said, my voice cutting through the sterile air. They required my Social Security number. Furthermore, they initiated multiple hard credit inquiries. For an imposter to bypass my security software, they needed an inside operator. They needed someone who held legacy administrative privileges. I pointed to a specific line highlighted in yellow ink. That is an Internet Protocol address originating from a residential router in Shreveport, Louisiana, I explained. The timestamp correlates perfectly with the exact hour my credit monitoring alerts were disabled and rerouted to a secondary encrypted email account. Vernon closed his eyes. A thick bead of sweat rolled down his temple. He brought a shaking hand to his mouth, but could not formulate a single word. Kendall whipped her head around to look at our father. The realization struck her with physical force. She understood that her father had not just offered quiet support. He had executed the digital espionage required to steal his own daughter's identity. Dad Kendall choked out the tears finally spilling over her eyelashes. You logged into her accounts. You gave Mom the documents. I looked at Vernon. He finally opened his eyes and met my gaze. There was no defense left to mount. The illusion of the passive bystander was dead. He was an active participant in a syndicate that prioritized his wife's ambition over my financial survival. The structural integrity of the Gentry family collapsed inside that glass room. The reality of their situation descended upon them without mercy. The concrete suppliers were demanding payment. The lumber distributors had frozen their accounts. The $1.5 million cash wire was permanently canceled. The real estate LLC was bankrupt before it ever poured a single foundation. And now the federal government possessed a meticulous paper trail linking all of them to wire fraud and identity theft. Kendall buried her face in her hands. Her shoulders shook as the sobs racked her chest. The ambitious corporate founder dissolved into a terrified young woman facing the very real prospect of a federal indictment. Vernon leaned against the glass wall, looking out at the financial analysts working in the bullpen, realizing he was staring at a professional world he had just been exiled from. Patricia looked at the documents scattered across the table. The statutes, the photographs, the forged signature, and the access logs formed an impenetrable wall of evidence. She had spent her entire life controlling the narrative through sheer force of will, relying on charm, volume, and emotional coercion to bend reality to her liking. But facts do not respond to volume. A printed IP address cannot be charmed. A falsified notary seal cannot be gaslit. Cornered, stripped of her leverage, and facing total ruin, Patricia resorted to the only weapon she had left. She abandoned her polished matriarch persona and surrendered to unhinged panic. She slammed both of her hands flat against the glass table. The impact produced a sharp, echoing crack. She leaned over the surface, her face flushing a deep, mottled red. The veins in her neck strained against her skin. "You are acting like a lunatic," Patricia screamed. Her voice tore through her throat, raw and desperate. "Look at what you are doing to your own sister. Look at your father. You are destroying this family out of spite. You could have fixed this with one phone call, but you wanted to ruin us. You are unhinged. Stop being so dramatic." The words hung in the sterile air of the conference room. Stop being so dramatic. It was the phrase she used on the country club lawn when I pointed out the monogrammed dress. It was the phrase she used in the catering kitchen when I confronted her with the fraudulent brochure. It was the phrase she had weaponized for 32 years to invalidate my perception and enforce my compliance. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice to match her frantic pitch. I sat at the head of the glass table, surrounded by the physical proof of my own vindication, and felt a profound, unshakable peace. I looked up at the woman who had traded my future for a vanity project. I maintained steady, unbroken eye contact. I let a few seconds of silence pass, ensuring she felt the full weight of her own powerlessness. "Mom," I said, my voice perfectly calm and devoid of all emotion, "stop being dramatic. This is just a routine federal audit." It is a Tuesday in late October. The oppressive Louisiana summer has finally broken, replaced by a crisp, dry breeze that moves off the Mississippi River and filters through the downtown high-rises. I sit at my glass desk in New Orleans. The dual monitors display a new set of municipal bond allocations. The office hums with the familiar rhythmic sound of keyboards and low professional conversations. 3 months have passed since the heavy acoustic door of Conference Room A sealed shut, trapping my family in the vacuum of their own creation. When a fraudulent structure collapses, the initial impact is deafening. But the true work happens in the silent aftermath, during the quiet, methodical clearing of the rubble. I did not experience a cinematic montage of healing. I did not weep into a cup of tea or stare longingly out of a rain-slicked window. I went back to work. I reviewed commercial contracts. I audited municipal ledgers. I paid my utility bills and watered the plants in my apartment. Healing from familial betrayal does not arrive like a sudden burst of sunlight. It feels like the slow, steady settling of dust over a battlefield. You simply wake up one morning and realize the air is clear enough to breathe. The commercial banking system operates without sentimentality. Pelican State Bank permanently voided the $1.5 million commercial development loan. Vincent, the chief risk officer, filed the mandatory suspicious activity reports with the federal regulatory agencies. He ensured my legal name and my professional credentials were formally uncoupled from the fraudulent Uniform Commercial Code lien. My credit profile remains pristine. It is locked behind biometric security gateways and dual-factor authentication protocols that no unauthorized user can ever access. The consequences for the architects of the fraud were distributed with clinical precision. The Federal Bureau of Investigation did not need to conduct a theatrical raid on Harper. The forensic evidence was already digitized, time-stamped, and verified. Federal agents visited her real estate office in a nondescript strip mall on a Tuesday morning. They did not raise their voices. They simply presented a warrant, confiscated her physical notary logbooks, and seized her official state seal. Harper surrendered her Louisiana notary commission the following afternoon. She pleaded guilty to falsifying an authentic act on a commercial banking document. Because she cooperated with the investigators and possessed no prior criminal record, the federal judge spared her a mandatory prison sentence. Instead, she received 5 years of strict federal probation. She now works at a fast food drive-thru on the edge of town. She is legally barred from holding any position requiring fiduciary trust, state licensing, or financial oversight. She played the role of the mirror daughter, desperate to wear my achievements like a borrowed coat, and it cost her the ability to build a genuine, respectable life of her own. My mother and father faced a more complex and devastating reckoning. The state attorney general prepared to file formal charges for identity theft and wire fraud, utilizing the access logs that exposed my father as the digital accomplice. To avoid standing trial and facing mandatory sentencing minimums, Patricia and Vernon were forced to negotiate a brutal settlement with the prosecution and the defrauded creditors. The justice system requires tangible restitution. The concrete suppliers and wholesale lumber distributors who froze their accounts filed swift civil suits to recoup their financial losses. My parents were cornered. They were forced to liquidate their entire retirement portfolio. They drained their investment accounts, incurred severe early withdrawal penalties, and took out a high-interest reverse mortgage on their home in Shreveport. The generational wealth they spent decades pretending to possess evaporated in a matter of weeks, funneled directly to their legal counsel and their angry vendors. The country club where they hosted the grand opening revoked their membership due to non-payment of dues. The local politicians who smiled for the cameras and held the red ribbon quickly issued public statements distancing themselves from the Gentry family. Shreveport is a small, interconnected city where reputation is currency. Patricia can no longer walk into her favorite boutiques or attend charity luncheons without feeling the sharp, burning gaze of her former peers. The social exile is a far more devastating punishment for my mother than any financial penalty. She spent her entire life curating a flawless image, and she must now live in the wreckage of her own public exposure. Gentry and Daughters Heritage Estates never poured a single square foot of concrete. The limited liability company was formally dissolved in federal bankruptcy court, the asset list reading like a catalog of failed ambition. Kendall lost her designer wardrobe and her luxury leased vehicle. The bank repossessed the car from her driveway in the middle of the afternoon. She moved back into my parents' heavily mortgaged house. She spends her days searching for entry-level marketing positions, forced to explain the glaring gap in her resume and her association with a bankrupt, fraudulent enterprise to potential employers. They constructed an elaborate trap designed to steal my financial stability, and they ended up locking themselves inside it. In the commercial finance sector, we utilize a concept called loss mitigation. When an underwriter identifies a toxic asset, the protocol is not to nurture the asset or hope it magically regains its value. The protocol is to sever the connection, isolate the exposure, and protect the healthy capital. For 32 years, I treated my family like a long-term investment. I poured my time, my patience, and my emotional energy into the Gentry household, hoping the ledger would eventually balance. I thought if I achieved enough, if I became successful enough, they would finally recognize my value. I failed to realize that you cannot balance a ledger when the other party is keeping two sets of books. They did not want my success to celebrate it. They wanted my success so they could spend it. I did not receive an apology. I have not spoken to any of them since they walked out of my corporate lobby 3 months ago. Many people believe closure requires a tearful reconciliation or a profound admission of guilt from the perpetrators. That is a dangerous myth sold by television dramas and self-help gurus. Toxic individuals do not apologize. They merely reframe the narrative to cast themselves as the victims of an unfair universe. Patricia likely tells her remaining social circle that I am a ruthless, ungrateful daughter who abandoned the family during a time of need. Vernon likely nods in silent agreement, maintaining his comfortable role as the quiet martyr. Kendall likely blames the local economy or hostile banking regulations for her failed venture. I do not care what story they tell. Their narrative has no jurisdiction in my reality. I do not require their contrition to validate my peace. True closure is not something someone else hands to you. Closure is the quiet realization that you no longer care what the liar is saying. My perimeter is secure. My name belongs entirely to me. I walk through my life with a light, unburdened step, free from the heavy, suffocating shadow of their expectations. I do not check my phone with a sense of dread. I do not spend my weekends deciphering their passive-aggressive demands. I spend my time auditing actual risks, surrounded by people who respect boundaries and operate in the light of verifiable truth. If you are listening to this and you recognize these signs in your own life, I want you to understand your own inherent power. You do not have to absorb the risk for people who view you as an asset. You have the right to lock the door. You have the right to audit the relationship. You have the right to walk away without offering a single word of explanation. Drop a comment below if you have ever had to sever a tie to protect your peace. Subscribe to the channel so we can continue dissecting the truth together, one story at a time. Remember the day I drove 6 hours to stand in the blistering heat? Remember the crisp navy dress, the silver monogram, and the imposter standing in my rightful place while my family smiled for the cameras? Sometimes, the best thing toxic people can do is push you out of the frame. It gives you the perfect angle to take the photo that brings them down.